Welcome to this explainer. If you've been watching global markets recently, the story of modern Europe has honestly been, well, pretty gloomy. But right in the middle of this widespread slowdown, there is this massive, fascinating paradox. If you want a literal blueprint for how to build an incredibly resilient economy during a period of stagnation, Poland is absolutely the ultimate case study. It's a story that challenges almost everything we think we know about economic development.
Just look at the contrast here. On one side, you've got these established European titans who are really struggling. We're talking serious debt crises, aging populations, and a severe lack of innovation and investment. But then you look at Poland, and their reality is entirely different. They have quietly transformed into the fastest-growing major economy on the whole continent. Their debt-to-GDP ratio is incredibly manageable, and they are genuinely innovating, pumping out new tech and reinvesting in tools that make their workforce highly productive. It honestly looks like a modern economic miracle, but how exactly did a former Soviet satellite state actually pull this off?
So to really wrap our heads around this David versus Goliath story, we got to rewind to the starting line back in the 1990s. When Poland and other Warsaw Pact countries finally detached from the failing USSR, they were facing extreme economic hardship. Poland was in such rough shape that they had a GDP per capita of just $1,700. Let that sink in for a second. That was literally less than 10% of what you would see in Western Europe at the exact same time. Out of sheer desperation, they had to pivot from a centrally planned economy to a free market. But how they did it? That changed the entire game.
A lot of their neighbors, like Russia and Hungary, they just ripped the Band-Aid right off with something called shock therapy, basically immediate chaotic privatization. And the result? Unchecked oligarchs swooped in and completely seized massive industries for themselves. Poland, however, went completely against the grain. They chose a path of slow, competitive change. By avoiding those reckless experiments, they managed to steer completely clear of the oligarch trap that had completely paralyzed the nations right next door.
This slow transition was brilliant because it let them build a highly functional economy step by step. Instead of just handing state assets over to a tiny circle of insiders, Poland took a multifaceted approach. First, they held public offerings. Next, they aggressively pushed for foreign investment. And third, they introduced employee stock ownership plans. By taking this super deliberate route, they forced the newly privatized businesses to actually compete fairly with the old, government-owned ones. It slashed corruption and built a genuinely competitive marketplace right from the ground up.
Now here's where they play the European Union game entirely differently. They joined the EU, sure, but they absolutely refused to adopt the euro as their currency, opting instead to keep the zloty. And honestly, that was a masterstroke. During the global financial crisis, struggling countries like Greece and Spain were locked into the euro, meaning they couldn't deflate their currency to manage debt or boost exports. By keeping the zloty, Poland maintained crucial monetary autonomy. They could manage their own inflation and keep their exchange rates competitive to buffer against massive global shocks.
But hey, don't mistake that currency independence for them rejecting the EU. Not at all. Despite technically staying outside the Eurozone, Poland fully leaned into its EU membership, becoming the single largest recipient of EU cohesion funds. We are talking about a staggering $220 billion so far. But the real genius isn't just that they secured the bag, it's that they were way more conscientious about how they actually spent that money compared to other nations getting assistance.
They used those funds to aggressively diversify. For instance, they transformed their automotive sector into an absolute powerhouse that now accounts for 11% of their entire industrial output and 4% of their GDP. It's now their fourth largest employer. They drew in massive foreign direct investment from titans like Fiat, Toyota, and Volkswagen. And they aren't just churning out old tech, they are leaning heavily into the future with electric vehicles and advanced battery technologies.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that they didn't just stop at manufacturing, they diversified into a legitimate tech powerhouse. Their information and communication technology, or ICT market, has surged to a $26.5 billion valuation with year-on-year growth pushing past 4%. For an economy that started out so small, injecting this kind of highly technical, value-driven sector gave their GDP a massive shot in the arm. They basically stepped up to become the tech hub of Europe, which is something a lot of other countries have really struggled to pull off.
But, it hasn't all been smooth sailing. This is where the Polish miracle faced its most terrifying historical threat, the middle-income trap. It's that perilous moment where a country's growth just sort of stalls out right before it hits high-income status. For Poland, this triggered a massive brain drain. Because of the EU's free movement of labor, their smartest, most talented workers could literally just pack their bags, move to a richer country like Germany, and earn way more money in better conditions.
So, how on earth do you stop your brightest minds from walking out the door?
Poland's answer was incredibly bold. They implemented a 0% income tax for young workers under the age of 26. Just zero. Since 2019, this massive tax break has been their core weapon to keep skilled youth within their borders. But as we all know, a tax break alone isn't going to stop a brain drain if the actual jobs are boring.
And that brings us perfectly to the Digital Poland initiative. Beyond just slashing taxes, Poland created this brilliant win-win scenario. They cranked up funding for R&D in cities like Warsaw, Krakow, and Wrocław. The pitch to young tech talent was super enthusiastic and simple. Sure, you could go to Germany and make a slightly higher salary, but there you'll just be a tiny cog and a stagnant machine. Stay here in Poland, enjoy a much lower cost of living, an amazing quality of life, and actually be a meaningful player on cutting-edge, innovative projects.
And the crazy thing is, this combination of policy and cultural pitch is actually working. By investing so heavily in education, they now boast something like 66,000 ICT students and 430,000 IT employees. Poland is successfully turning itself into Europe's budding Silicon Valley. They are pulling in huge foreign and domestic investments, completely reversing that terrifying brain drain we were just talking about.
Now, we can't fully understand this economy without addressing the massive geopolitical elephant in the room. In response to mounting tensions and the invasion of Ukraine right on their doorstep, Poland has ramped up its military spending by over 300% in just the last decade alone. Historically speaking, Poland has had a really tough time geographically during global conflicts, and they are making incredibly serious investments to make sure that never happens again.
While their main goal is to secure 500,000 troops and tons of new hardware, this unbelievable spending is acting as a massive economic driver. It temporarily slashes unemployment, it trains up skilled labor that eventually trickles down into the civilian sector, and it builds critical dual-use infrastructure. We're talking better roads, new hospitals, and advanced cybersecurity networks. Plus, to finally cut their reliance on Russian fossil fuels, this tension is driving an expensive but totally vital push into sustainable energy, including Poland's very first nuclear power plant.
Of course, there's always a catch. Military hardware is not a one-and-done purchase. It has to be maintained and replaced. This military boom carries a really heavy price tag. Because of this, Poland is staring down the barrel of some severe debt vulnerabilities leading up to 2030. It's actually the exact same trap currently plaguing established players like France, who are staring at a projected 117% debt-to-GDP ratio by 2026. If outside funding dries up, Poland could easily slide into that exact same precarious situation.
Furthermore, there's another structural threat looming, and it's basically the ultimate paradox of their success. As Poland's living standards rise, which obviously is exactly what they want, they risk losing that cheap manufacturing labor advantage that attracted so much of that initial foreign investment. Lower incomes made them the go-to manufacturing hub within the EU. But if their incomes catch up to places like Germany or the Netherlands, a lot of that outside investment is likely going to slow down significantly.
So, to wrap up this explainer, we really have to ask a difficult question. Poland has brilliantly played the cards it was dealt. They've innovated, they've avoided the worst debt pitfalls, and they've capitalized on their location by trading heavily with wealthier neighbors. But so much of Poland's unprecedented growth has been entirely dependent on exporting to those exact same economies. So, how can Poland sustain this incredible economic miracle if those established European neighbors begin to completely fail? It's a massive, complex puzzle, and watching how Poland navigates this next chapter is going to be absolutely fascinating. Thanks so much for learning with us today.